You're listening to the Rewilding Earth podcast. The Rewilding Earth podcast is supported by businesses such as Patagonia, Catula, and Biohabitats, as well as the Whedon Foundation and listeners like you. If you love the work that the Rewilding Institute is doing, please consider donating at rewilding.org. And be sure to sign up for our weekly newsletter while you're there. Allison Jones received her BA in Environmental Studies at the University of California at Santa Cruz under the guidance of her mentor and advisor, Michael Soule. She then completed her MS in Conservation Biology at the University of Nevada, Reno in 1996. Her master's study analyzed the effects of cattle grazing on small mammal communities in the Great Basin. In 2014, Allison ascended to Executive Director of Wild Utah Project until she moved on from the organization in January of 2020. Allison currently serves as principal of Allison Allison Jones, LLC, where she specializes in large landscape-scale conservation analysis and analysis of state and federal wildlife and habitat management plans and revisions. She currently works on a contract basis to university researchers, independent scientists, government agencies, and conservation NGOs. I started today by asking Allison to get us caught up on all the Wild Utah projects.
Wild Utah Project has a lot of really cool studies and projects going on. But maybe the one that leaps to mind right away is our Wasatch Wildlife Watch. We currently are about to launch the third year of this study, which takes place in the central Wasatch Mountains, covering about 7 canyons, mostly on the front side of the Wasatch Range above Salt Lake City. And it's a trail camera study. And we have, 100 and something trail cameras. I think it's 120 this year, something like that. And we have volunteers, one for each camera, who are honchoing those cameras and putting them in their assigned spots to gather as much information as we can on the medium to large mammals, both ungulates and all mammals, predators, that are moving through the Wasatch Range. And each camera is moved twice during the summer. So there's 3 locations for each camera. So you can do the math. It's a lot of cameras taking a lot of motion-triggered photos over the field season, which runs from, May or June, depending on when the folks can get to their assigned sites, to the mid to late August. And we have millions of images that are being processed and sorted. And this is feeding into actually a PhD study for Austin Green at the University of Utah, Conservation and Ecology Lab. And basically, what the study is aiming to do is to get the data that the planners and the land managers and wildlife managers needed yesterday in terms of the interaction of these species with the wild-urban interface, where they're moving, the pinch points, the important movement corridors, a little bit on relative abundances, and importantly, which features of the human landscape are affecting the distribution and abundance of these animals. For example, what is it about being closer to the wild-urban interface when species X, Y, or Z is suddenly not detected by our cameras? Is it human recreation? Is it the trails? Is it roads? Is it buildings or density of buildings, et cetera? All these layers are laid over the occupancy model, basically, that Austin Green is running. And all this data, the land managers, the Forest Service, Division of Wildlife Resources, the Cottonwood Canyon Transportation EIS process, all this data and the analyses resulting from this data are being funneled to these folks, decision makers, planners, and agency people to make important decisions about human development and, importantly, protection of habitat.
Can you talk about anything that, like an example that's come of this data that if it hadn't existed, things might have gone the other way in terms of development decisions or anything else?
Well, we're not quite there yet because the study is not quite done. The initial analyses are being passed on, to the planners and the folks that need the data, and it will be used soon. And I mentioned the Little Cottonwood Canyon travel plan environmental impact statement. This is a really hot issue in the Central Wasatch right now. How are they going to address the fact that we're loving these canyons to death, here in the Wasatch?
Yeah.
All the recreation that's up there, to ski areas up there. There's talk of linking ski areas, over to other canyons, parking issues, traffic issues. What are the solutions that will be put into place? Will it be, tunnels? Will it be widening roads? Will it be gondolas? Will things be closed? Things like that. So stay tuned. The data will be super important in the next year for this particular decision process in particular.
As I've talked to more people that are doing this kind of work, you all kind of hang out in the same places. How is this really having a direct effect on policy in general?
There's plenty of examples throughout the West where the agencies are really, and I mean the land and wildlife, state and federal management agencies, they're really getting into this advanced technology, right, and using it to make better decisions for the land and habitat for wildlife. And so the motion triggered trail cameras, that's just one example. Drones are coming into fashion. That's an amazing tool to gather so much data more than we could have done on the ground in the past, for example. And the trackers that they're putting on animals, tiny little pit tags around the legs of birds that only weigh a few grams and things like that. And I think there's plenty of examples where some agencies are embracing this technology to make better decisions on the ground. And I think it also depends kind of which species and which issues you're talking about. I think that there's certain species and habitats that are easier for the agencies to make kind of the right planning or management or conservation decision on. Things like amphibians, beavers, fish and their habitat. When it comes to data that might be showing that wolves are moving through a certain area and need really important protections to let them travel, then that's where the policy might come more into play.
When you guys come in with this level of data and irrefutable photographic evidence and tracker data and drone stuff and everything else, it just makes it a lot harder than for people on the agency side who might politically not want to do or make a decision in a certain direction, in the direction of wildlife and protecting that or restoration. It just makes it really, really hard for them, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm. Oh, I totally agree. Yeah, especially with, again, some of those super rare and controversial species. If a trail camera picks up a wolf or a lynx where it was assumed they don't live anymore, the agencies, have to kind of sit up and take notice, especially if it's a federally protected species under the Endangered Species Act. You can't refute a positive ID from a trail camera, right?
Right.
But Wild Utah Project has a long history of putting citizen scientists to work on many of our projects, and it just enables us to collect 10, 20, 50 times more data than we would be able to do just with our staff and a technician or two or an intern or two. It's remarkable. The Wasatch Wildlife Watch trail camera study would absolutely not be possible without our roughly 100 volunteers, more actually, working on that project.
What's it like to organize an operation like that, or a set? Or I imagine Wild Utah's got a whole bunch of overlapping and different things going on. What give us a sense of what it's like to organize all of that?
It can get a little crazy. We have 6 separate projects right now at Wild Utah Project that use citizen science volunteers. And so basically we divide and conquer. Well, I was on staff at Wild Utah Project, which was up until just this past January, whether I was the conservation biologist or in my last 6 years, the director. I was in charge of a couple of the citizen science projects as well. We also have 2 conservation biologists or ecologists on staff, so we divvied up. So everyone's in charge of basically 2 or 3 projects. Our summer interns can be helpful in helping to manage. Our communication directors, the one that's in charge of communications with all these volunteers. So we're kind of a well-oiled machine, but you've got to be on top of your game. I mean, we had probably, I want to say between 250 and 300 volunteers last year in one way, shape, or form working on something. Yeah, it was pretty crazy.
So in terms of like big plans, what does all this play into on a 3,000 foot view of Wild Utah Project in terms of like restoration, rewilding, plans that you have proactively, not to just, I know you guys don't just sit and fight everything, although we need groups and people to do that, to stay alert to things that are needing to be dealt with immediately. But how does all of this feed into a bigger, larger plan for, half Utah, kind of like the Half Earth movement?
Yeah, in a couple ways, and I think one example I'd like to really touch on is Wild Utah Project's stream and riparian restoration program. Basically, we've done kind of the wildland network designs, for Utah and for the Heart of the West region in the northeast corner of the state, and for the Colorado Plateau. And so we've identified, the core areas, but when it comes to the linkages or corridors between core areas, the riparian linkages are one of the most critical. And here's some low-hanging fruit in our state and throughout the West, because so many of our riparian corridors are degraded, as you know, for lots of reasons. One of the best restoration tools at our disposal is beaver reintroduction or recolonization. If you can foster or encourage natural recolonization of beaver to help, repair those degraded streams and raise that water table, but also the use of the human-made beaver dams, the beaver dam analogs. And so Wild Utah Project is in year 4 or 5 of a statewide effort to work with many partners and fellow scientists and states, wildlife and land management agencies to tackle many of our watersheds and streams within those watersheds that are, again, the low-hanging fruit that we know are degraded, and that we can bring the resources together to identify where we need to use what tools, where it makes sense to try to encourage beaver recovery. We've got a top-notch science team up at Utah State University, led by Joe Wheaton and his beaver recovery assessment tool. It's a really cool modeling exercise they did that shows all the perennial streams in Utah and basically which ones need beaver recovery the most based on their condition. And then Wild Utah Project will come in and do the pre-restoration, whether we're talking about actual beavers or the beaver dam analogs, we'll do the pre-restoration stream and riparian functional assessment using the rapid stream riparian assessment protocol, and we'll get the baseline data. Then the restoration effort, for example, the beaver dam analogs will come in, and Wild Utah Project will bring the citizen science volunteers to build those, with our various partners. Division of Wildlife Resources is a big partner for us on doing these BDAs. And then we'll wait, a few years to see how the restoration action is doing in terms of recovering the stream and riparian area. And then we'll come in again with the RSRA protocol, again with our volunteers who've been trained in the protocol, and we'll get the post-restoration data. So it's a proof of concept to show that whether it's the real thing beavers or these analogs, that it's working. And this is just a great program, a great bang for your buck in terms of restoration energy and dollars. And we got a lot of work to do in Utah, but we're really excited that Utah's on board. The beaver bandwagon, the BDA bandwagon, and it's really exciting.
You're listening to the Rewilding Earth podcast. Did you know we also publish insightful and inspirational content from leading rewilding scholars, poets, artists, and organizers from around the world? You can visit rewilding.org and sign up for our weekly digest to receive brilliant, fresh insights on everything rewilding. You'll find over a decade of articles and news from the front lines of wildlands protection and all kinds of restoration efforts. Check us out at rewilding.org, and don't forget to share it with friends. For the lay people, and this was the first question I ever had when I saw a human-made beaver dam, and I hang out with conservation biologists, so I don't feel embarrassed to ask this. When do you decide to use a human beaver over a beaver?
Not all ranchers, irrigators, county commissioners, people down in Garfield County, for example, they've not all come to be beaver lovers. And so while the Division of Wildlife Resources, I think, would love to follow Joe Wheaton's brat model and just plunk beavers down wherever Joe Wheaton's model, shows red, like really degraded and needing beavers, they have to kind of cool their jets and just make sure that people up and downstream and, irrigators and farmers and ranchers and the local community are cool with that. And it's not always the case. And when you can kind of get the same effects, and the restorative values and functions with the fake beaver dam, you just go ahead and do those. They're cheap, they're fun to build, you bring in the volunteers. And the neat thing is, if there happens to be beaver anywhere in that watershed, upstream or down, they'll eventually, find your beaver dam analogs and maybe settle in, maybe, fix them, redo them. They'll probably thinking, what were these humans thinking? Do them right, and they'll maintain them. And hopefully by the time the beaver find them and move in, by that time, the community and the ranchers and the reservoir owners and realize the good effects that these structures are having on the watershed, and that they're not quote unquote stealing water from downstream users. You can basically see with your own eyes that the water trickling in more or less equals the water trickling out, and they can see the effects of that heightened, that raised water table, creating more lush, grasses and forbs for grazing cows, for example. The green belt extends, wider away from the stream channel because of the raised water table. And the water is delivered downstream to the reservoirs longer because these fake beaver dams, the ponds that we create, hold the water long. All these great benefits. Hopefully by the time, the beavers move in and start maintaining them, then everyone's, cool with that, because we want to get to the point where everyone wants these ponds. And it's not just one or two. To do restoration right, you really kind of need to sew up that creek, so to speak. hopefully everyone wants those ponds to stick around. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, it's kind of hilarious and somewhat with a dash of sadness that they're cool with you building dams and not worried about you stealing water, but they think beavers somehow have these little. I mean, I just can't imagine what goes on in people's heads sometimes, but whatever it takes, right?
Well,
And it seems to be working.
yeah. Yeah. Here in Utah, it's a lot of little baby steps, a lot of baby steps and just kind of, working with the different partners and players best you can. And sometimes just sort of like keeping your head down, like, hey, we're doing good things for the land and wildlife here. Like, keep your head down and keep doing it.
Well, so you're a perfect person to ask because you've had enough time on the ground in a particular area to probably answer this really well, which is you talk about baby steps. Is it going to has it had an effect on people that you've known for a long time, landowners that you've known for a long time or known of? Does it have a cumulative effect?
I think so. Again, I'm mostly seeing this from like the agency standpoint, the Division of Wildlife Resources,
Well, them
15
too.
years ago didn't even have, yeah, oh yeah, they didn't have a beaver conservation and management plan, and now they do. But Utah, I think, does a pretty good job. Our fourth grade curriculum is good in ecology and environment, field trips, and looking at things holistically. And I mean, I can only hope that the tide's sort of turning a little bit on not only the beaver issue but others. Climate change, believe it or not, is still a matter of some debate here, especially with our our legislature. The value of just public lands and open space in our state of Utah. That's not always celebrated as it should be, but that tide's turning as well because our the $1 billion recreation economy in the West, Utah is just smack in the middle of that, and people are starting to wake up to the fact that we've got to not nibble away at or sell off or give to the states or any crazy idea like that. We need to continue to preserve and carefully manage these public lands because they're so critical to Utah's tourism and recreation economy. And if we can do that, the conservation groups and the Rewilding Institute and Wildlands Network and the conservation organizations thinking really big can, be like, yes, and, we have to, connect them to, again, kind of baby steps, keep your head down.
Yeah. Well, in so many ways,
Yeah.
I've always viewed Utah as one of the front lines on public lands fights in so many ways, and it's always in the center of
Mm-hmm.
something. And one of the things that you don't get to
Mm-hmm.
see on social media updates or newspaper headlines is the feedback from people like you who work so hard and have for so many years. The reaction to lands, you were so diplomatic there, but land's just being completely ripped, freshly put into protection, and then ripped right back out of our hands or wildlife's hands, really. I mean, you could have gone a little harder on that if you wanted to, but I will. And
Yeah, go for
what's it
it.
like? Because you got that big, huge amount of money that's spent. The outdoor recreation is no joke in Utah. I mean, I don't know if you've ever seen a comparison study of other states, but you have to be in the top 5 or 10 in Western states
Oh,
in terms of
absolutely.
money that you guys that your wild places draw. So, but from the headlines and everything, it looked like you were just another helpless state in federal policy just switching idea on Bureau of Land Management land and all that. Their ideology is just completely different from anything that's ever come before it. And what does a strong state like yours feel like when you live there? What was the backlash like, or what is it ever like when people really make big threats toward big chunks of your public lands there?
Oh, yeah, and I think that the groups that are suing to, reenact the original boundaries of the Grand Staircase and Bears Ears National Monuments, such as Southern Utah Wilderness Alliance and Utah chapter of the Sierra Club, et cetera. I think they're confident that the law is on their side, that what was done was illegal, and it might need to, wait for a hopeful new administration that will come in next year with any luck. And so it seems to me, and again, I'm not on the front line of that fight, nor is Wild Utah Project, but it seems to me that the environmental attorneys overseeing that are pretty confident, so they're just letting that work its way through, and they're working on the other more immediate brush fires. Southern Utah Wilderness Alliance is activated and deployed to fight for every unit of the Red Rock Wilderness proposal that's in Congress, and when new oil and gas drilling is going to eat away at the boundaries of one of those units, SUA is there, fighting that. So I think the really big picture things like you're talking about with those two monuments, that's sort of being just it's churning through the legal process. Other groups are working on some other really big issues regarding those sage grouse conservation plans that have been just a ping pong ball, and that's at the national level across the range of the sage grouse. That's been a real mess. BLM grazing management. There's so many big issues that our partner organizations are working right now, and it's certainly not just Utah.
One thing I always worry about is scientists' mental health in a time when you guys aren't appreciated like you have ever been in the past. And that's going to go away. We'll have another administration. Hopefully, we'll go back to listening to scientists again. But on a big level, on the big picture, it just feels like everybody's gotten thrown under the bus. If you have any kind of a degree or experience, or formerly were the person to ask about conservation issues, and now you're being passed up for a politician or a stakeholder with an obvious beef against conservation and everything. How has that been for you guys in terms of, is it that way on the ground? Is it that bad on the ground? Or are there people in agencies that are just kind of keeping their heads down, agreeing with you, but trying to keep their jobs too?
Yes. And I very much, I can't really speak from the perspective of the career, professional agency, biologists and ecologists right now. And I feel for them. They are in a tough spot, but you kind of hit the nail on the head here in Utah with some of these. I mean, there are some great scientists and biologists in these federal agencies, and it does feel like they're kind of, keeping their head down, and they're reaching out actually more than before to groups like Wild Utah Project, who can, bring resources. We can bring an army of citizen scientists. These agencies are having their budgets slashed. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service field office, when someone quits or leaves, there's never money to rehire. Everyone's doing 2 or 3 people's jobs. It's awful. And so I'm finding that these, career professionals here in Utah are reaching out for collaborative partnerships more than before, and everyone's kind of keeping their head down. So it's a really tough time for those agency scientists right now. I really do feel for them.
That's interesting. I wonder if something will happen in the future that we'll be able to get a little bit of space and perspective looking back at this, and find that they pushed people who were formerly more staunchly very conservative in the agency and wanted to protect their jobs and everything into the arms of the conservation movement.
Yeah, I hope so. But in the meantime, the frontline defense environmental groups have been, suing the agencies right and left, as they should, when the agency abandons sound policy, breaks the law, or throws their own, rules and regulations out the window. We've, unfortunately been seeing all of that. So yeah, I mean, groups like us that are left in the middle, are looking for opportunities for partnering despite all that.
So what's next for you?
Well, it's just been a few months, and I'm still involved in Wild Utah Project. They're calling me the emeritus extraordinaire. So I'm on the website, and you can still reach me at my wildutahproject.org email. There's 3 or 4 manuscripts, publications from various projects I'm wrapping up and submitting right now. We have a big long-term study at the Kennecott copper mine, actually, that's looking at the long-term interaction between these sagebrush treatments and the return of livestock grazing. So I'm still kind of honchoing that project. That's a 20-year project. There'll be a lot of publications. Last month, I spent 2 or 3 weeks intensely up at our legislature, first fighting and then working to fix a pretty bad wildlife bill. The original bill was going to basically call on the Division of Wildlife to just put bluntly, kill a lot more predators in the deer hunting units that are below objective. So we worked with scientists at USU and carnivore ecologists and specific legislators to soften some language in there to bring it more in line with what the Division of Wildlife already does in regards to managing predators. So we didn't totally castrate or eviscerate the bill, but we definitely went a long way towards that. So we are basically proclaiming, sort of a small victory on that. And with our legislature, it's often about kind of damage control, and it's unfortunate that our legislature takes it upon itself to tell Division of Wildlife Resources, staffed by very capable biologists, how to do their job, and they don't do a good job telling our wildlife agency how to do their job, in my opinion. So that's something I wouldn't have been able to really jump in with those feet at Wild Utah Project. We can really, get involved up the hill like that. But now I can.
Well, I can't wait to see what other adventures you get into as you transition into this newfound freedom and ability to move in places that you weren't before, and also including Rewilding Leadership Council. So I can't wait to see what we all do together. And I want to thank you so much for taking the time for being on the show today. I know you're super busy, so thank you so much for being on Rewilding Earth.
And thank you, Jack. It's my pleasure. Let's do it again one day.
Thanks for listening to the Rewilding Earth podcast. We do what we do because of you. This podcast is supported by listeners like you who long to live in a wilder world. Please consider donating at rewilding.org and subscribe to our weekly news and article digest while you're there. To go the extra mile, you can follow and share Rewilding Earth on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. Bonus points for sharing this podcast with your friends. To listen to past episodes, go to rewilding.org/pod. That's rewilding.org/pod.